Well, the day is finally upon us. The closing arguments were delivered in the Chauvin trial, and, I have to say I'm really split on this because listening to what I didn't really listen much to the defense's closing arguments. I tried to catch as much as I could of the prosecution since I think that's the big focus because the prosecution are the ones who have the burden of proof. Burden of proof is always on the government in these criminal trials, and so I wanted to hear if they were going to make a good pitch, because there is a good pitch to be made as far as convicting Chauvin goes. You really could come up with a compelling argument that Derek Chauvin should be put away for what he did. Of course, what he was charged with, I said from the beginning, was not appropriate, so it's harder to make the case for what he was charged with specifically, but there's a path there. There is a good way to do it. However, from what I saw from the prosecution, they did not make their closing arguments were not at all strong and compelling to me. Now, of course, it's obvious because I was not impressed all the way through with their case. However, it is it's pretty, I guess, underwhelming. You would expect them to not make simple mistakes. There were a lot of simple mistakes, factually speaking, with what the prosecution said, which a lot of people pointed out. You can find them all over Twitter. One of the most obvious ones and annoying ones was when he was describing the situation. He said, well, George Floyd, he was just sitting in his car with his friend, with the windows rolled up and just minding his own business, and then he hears a couple taps on the window, and he looks out, and what does he see? And he shows a screenshot from the body cam footage of the officer holding a gun, pointing the gun at George Floyd. Now, that's just obviously not the way that the story happened. They skipped a few steps. The officer knocked on his window, and then Floyd rolled it down, and they were talking for a few seconds before the gun came out, because he was telling Floyd to put his hands up, or put his hands on the steering wheel or whatever, but that's just one example of the little things that they were doing to distort things. Now, if I were sitting on the jury, I would look at that as the prosecutors being purposefully dishonest. Another thing they said that was really, really egregious was, they were talking about how George Floyd was calling out for his mother. Now, there's no reason to lie about that, because in reality, it seems that George Floyd was calling out for his girlfriend. So it doesn't make much of a difference whether it's his mother or his girlfriend if he's, if he fears for his life or whatever, and he's crying out in pain or desperation or something like that. It's still sad either way if you're sympathetic to him as a figure. So why would the prosecution needlessly lie about something like that? And if somebody lies to you about something little, they tend to be the kind of person who lies to you about big things too. So given all that, I was not impressed with what I saw and what I heard today from them. But of course, I'm a sample size of one, and I'm not one of the 12 jurors. Nor am I one of the 2 alternate jurors. I think that there was also a lot of people, if you just, not the Twitter as real life, but, using that as a bit of an aggregating device, you saw a lot of people making similar points that I did, pointing out the dumb things the prosecution said in their closing statements. Well, there were a lot of people pointing to things that the defense said in their closing statements, which I'll admit I did not watch as closely because I'm not that interested in the defense, and I didn't have time. Pointing out things the defense said and saying, oh my gosh, the defense is so stupid. How could they say something like this? They're just blowing up their own case. Why would they do this? And so I think it's safe to say that whatever you're predisposed to think to begin with, you're going to point out different things that each side is doing and just think that they're doing a terrible job. And it's not like the jurors are these perfectly neutral automatons who are just, you input data and they output the correct verdict. That's not how they are at all. They have their own biases. And so if they were sufficiently biased in favor of the prosecution to begin with, perhaps they're going to be more willing to overlook these simple misstatements of fact that the prosecution engages in. They're going to ignore the little screw-ups because they think that overall the narrative of the prosecution rings true. So in my view, really anything is possible. I don't think that you're going to get not guilty on all counts. I guess I'll rule that out. That's not going to happen. But so what you're going to get, I think, is either just, conviction on one or more counts, or a hung jury. But I don't think that there's ever, because there might be a couple holdouts, maybe. That's always a possibility. But you're not going to get a total acquittal across the board. Considering all the pressure that is on this jury, even if these were people who are somewhat persuadable, there's no way that what's been going on with the riots doesn't affect them, and that they don't personally fear for their safety. That's going to impact you. Because even if they were somewhat biased in favor of the prosecution to begin with, let's say, the trial wears on and they start to open their mind a little bit. It's going to take a lot to overcome the burden put on them by the riots and by Maxine Waters' comments and the threats of what might happen to them personally if they vote the wrong way. Because if there was an acquittal across the board, it would be known that that was unanimous and that all the jurors voted that way. If there is a mistrial because of a hung jury, you don't know necessarily who the holdouts were, and so it's easier to be a holdout in some sense than it is for all of them to convict. And of course, as far as social pressure is concerned, I think it's easy for all of them to convict. I think before I misspoke and I said all of them convict, I meant all of them acquit. Because if they convict, they'll be vaunted as heroes. The Black Lives Matter movement will lionize these jurors. Apparently, there were discussions earlier on about one of them having a potential book deal. And if they acquit, if the whole jury acquitted Derek Chauvin, I don't think that there would be a publisher who's looking to give a book deal to one of those jurors. Everyone would want those jurors would be pariahs in the all of America. So nobody would be willing to publish their work. I mean, they would probably lose their existing job if the jury really acquitted. And so it's not certain that there would be holdouts against the prosecution. There would be holdouts on the non-guilty side, on the acquittal side. But there definitely would be holdouts on the side of convicting Chauvin. Even if, let's say a majority of them decided that they wanted to acquit, there would still be a few jurors who would hold out and would just be unwilling, even if it's for general, just for the fear of their own safety, saying, I can't sign my name to acquitting Derek Chauvin, given the consequences. I don't think they'd say it that way, even with the other jurors in a closed room. I don't think that they would say that I fear for my life, and that's why I'm doing it. They might say, well, it's because I believe in social justice. That's why I'm doing it. And I'm sure that there will probably be a couple of jurors who also would hold out for that reason. Legitimately, I mean, not as a ploy for covering up their fear. I don't think that every juror who would want to vote to convict is necessarily a coward. They might just be a true believer. After all, the prosecution worked very hard to make sure that they picked a jury of would-be true believers. Now, I might be completely wrong. Robert Barnes, who is a legal expert I watch weekly, who I have great respect for, he says there absolutely will not be a hung jury. Either it's going to be convict or acquit. He does not. I believe that I'm quoting him correctly there. He thinks that there's no possibility of that. And he's much more of an expert than I am, but it's my humble opinion here. This is my YouTube channel. I say what I want, and in my humble opinion, I don't see how there could be an acquittal. Maybe acquittal on one or two charges, but there's going to be either a conviction on something, or it's going to be a hung jury. And remember, it could be they could reach a verdict on one or two of the charges and hang on one of the other charges, and that charge could be retried later. Because the judge doesn't declare a mistrial on all three charges necessarily. He could declare a mischarge on one or two, or a mistrial on one or two if the jury hangs on those charges. So I guess a really bad scenario would be if they acquit, which I don't think would happen. If they acquit on one of the most egregious charges, which I get them mixed up, like maybe felony murder. Maybe they acquit on felony murder and say, well, the statute clearly doesn't apply here, or on the third-degree murder, which is like the reckless endangerment thing. Maybe if they decide to acquit on a third-degree murder or something like that, and then they maybe convict on another one and hang on a second, or hang on the other two, that would be chaos. Because then the only verdict that comes out, because you're going to have a mistrial declared on the other two charges, the only verdict that they're going to get is an acquittal. That would be utter chaos, and the jurors know that. So I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that it's much more likely that on the lesser charges, they're going to one of them, at least one, they will convict, and then maybe hang on the more egregious charges. That to me seems like the most likely outcome. But again, for the jury to be hung at all, it's very difficult because there's a lot of pressure put on whoever the holdouts or holdout on the jury is. There's a lot of pressure just to get it over with and just to go home, because as long as the jury doesn't come to a verdict, the judge can keep sending them back and saying, okay, well, keep deliberating until the judge just gets fed up himself and says, okay, you can stop now. I'm going to declare a mistrial. So they could be there all weekend. I mean, nobody wants to do that. I think that Barnes is very correct when he says that jurors like to be home for the weekend, and that's understandable. Normal human beings like to be home for the weekend. They don't want to be sitting there deliberating over the same thing over and over just because one guy won't give in, and maybe that guy wants to go home too. But I think based on the expectations that Maxine Waters set, that unless Chauvin is convicted of first-degree murder, premeditated murder, something he wasn't charged with, that there should be riots. Well, then there's going to be riots. Not that I think Auntie Maxine has the pull that she used to, but I think that she has a decent read on the situation. That even if they convict on all three, the riots might be a little muted, but there's still going to be outrage over the lack of sufficient punishment that will be doled out. So if the jury does reach a verdict by this weekend, which is likely, I think, it will be interesting, to say the least, what exactly is going to go on. I think it's certainly going to be a rough weekend for the folks of Hennepin County. So with that said, I think I'll end it there for today.